I found this book in a secondhand store a few months ago, and I was not prepared for how weird and wild 18th century musical instruments were. I just thought it would be kind of cute and interesting, but no, there's some really weird stuff in here. So I just wanted to document why I found this interesting. So it's a collection by this 18th century scholar called Filippo Bonanni. There isn't actually that much information about him online, but from what I could find, he was an Italian Jesuit priest who really liked microscope lenses and copperplate engravings. He created the earliest practical illustrated guide for shell collectors and also published a study on the lacquer used on Chinese porcelain imports. I'm sure that's fascinating, but today we're looking at this, antique musical instruments and their players, which are copperplate engravings from his collection Gabinetto Armonico. I'm not Italian, I can't pronounce things. So this whole collection was published in 1772, and it's basically a set of copperplate engravings that document a whole lot of musical instruments that were contemporary to the time. There's a lot of pictures in this book and very little description. I have opinions about that. But it is 1770s Europe, right? So there are a lot of things that you do expect to see, like violin, lute, guitar, organ, harp, transverse flute. There are also predictably some earlier forms of instruments that are still in use today, such as Baroque recorder, French horn, unvalved trumpet, double bass viol, and upright harpsichord. Even some instruments that don't actually exist anymore, like the serpent, the spinet, or this, the long-necked arch lute. That looks so annoying to carry around. Maybe it's a good thing it doesn't exist anymore. But here's what's really interesting. I went into this expecting to see things like horns and flutes and organs and historical versions of various string instruments. But what I did not expect from this collection that first came off to me as quite academic or scholarly was things like spoons, clapper shoes, a toy wheel with bells. It explicitly says it's a toy. A sword blade, a whip, and bells hung around the necks of criminals. I'm noticing a theme here. Have you ever wanted to be the only person who could hear the sound of your instrument? This is a metal rod suspended on a gut string that you stick in your ears and then marvel at the beauty of the single note that you can play on it. It's 1700s headphones! How cool is that? So this is a string instrument called tromba marina, but interestingly there's also another one called tromba marina, which is actually a megaphone that was used by sea captains and sailors to amplify their voice when giving orders on ships. This is a beekeeper shepherding his bees with a large metal vessel. This is supposed to be for Christian monks to call for prayers, but the interesting thing is that you need both your hands to hit the plank, so you support it by holding it in your mouth. This is a wind instrument made from a scooped vegetable. It's interesting because if you think about it, it's really obvious that this is something that has been done for centuries, but somehow I just never thought about it. This is a water pitcher. When you talk into it, you sound like this, I think. This is a monochord, which is pretty interesting. It's actually a teaching tool, so it has two strings. One of them plays a drone, and you use the other one to demonstrate the harmonic series. There's some in here that are also completely hypothetical. This thing was proposed by Bonanni's mentor, Athanasius Kircher, who was another interesting sciencey guy from the 1700s. It's meant to be a voice amplifier, and it was never built. It's just a completely hypothetical instrument. But look at that, that's a cute instrument. This one also is called the Horn of Alexander the Great, which was just drawn from a description of some book in the Vatican Library, apparently. There's also a lot of non-European instruments in here, which is interesting because he would have never actually seen most of these and would have completely relied on written descriptions for reference of what these look like. This is supposed to be a vina. It's kind of funny that it only has one string. He labeled this one a Turkish violin, but also says in the notes that it's found in all Islamic countries from Siam to North Africa. These gamelan engravings are labeled as Indonesian. So when this collection was first published, it had a bunch of annotations and descriptions written by Bonanni himself. Obviously, they were originally in Italian, and I really wish this book had translated and included them all, because with all the weird instruments that are in this book, that include things like comb and paper or stones, bones, and shells, there's a few instruments that Bonanni particularly singles out and says are used by savages. According to him, marimba is the sweetest and most agreeable of African instruments. But he thinks that maracas are used by savages who know no better instrument. This book has loads of examples of rustic European rattles, like this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. And yet this one, which really isn't that different, it's just not European. He says it makes an agreeable sound to the ears of the barbarians who are accustomed to it. It's interesting because, from what I can tell, it's not very often that he actually inserts his opinion onto the instruments that he's describing, but he does it for several of the non-European ones, which is why I really wish this book included more of his original descriptions, because I just kind of want to know more context, right, of what he really thought about non-European instruments, because as much as he thought that they were used by savages, he did include them in the book, and he included a lot. There's several pictures in here of things that are allegedly Turkish, African, Indian, Persian, Indonesian, Chinese. That's a lot of non-European stuff to include from demographics that you think are barbarian. I know he was a history man of his time, whatever, but I just think it's really interesting that these are the specific places where his opinion was significant enough for it to be translated and included in the very limited amount of notes that there are. Which, just for reference, we're talking about this amount of notes compared to this amount of notes. But yeah, that was this book. It was super interesting. I hope I can find more books like this. Let me know what you think. What was your favorite weird instrument from the book? I didn't even get to them all. This book is thick. There's like 150 engravings in here. But yeah, if you found any of this interesting, let me know, and maybe I will look for more interesting books in secondhand stores. As if I'm not going to do that regardless of what you think.